shoved the courier against the wet wall and wrenched the ledger from shaking hands. Suspicion pushed the archivist forward. He smelled rain and cheap tobacco and knew, before he opened the cover, that the book belonged to someone who treated names as weapons. The courier hissed between teeth. "Let go," he begged. The archivist did not let go. A page fell open. A name had been circled twice in thick black ink. The margin bore a burned sigil. The problem stood clear in those first seconds. Names were being gathered. Names were being used. Suspicion was the emotion route that ran through him now, and it guided his fingers and choices as surely as any ritual rule. He shoved the ledger into his satchel and stepped back into the alley's darkness. The alley smelled of wet straw and iron. A street lamp smeared a narrow cone of pale light across slick cobbles. A man in a hood pushed through a side door and froze when he saw the ledger. "You can't take that," the man said, voice low. The archivist did not answer. He tied the ledger's strap with 2 careful knots. By the time he reached the archive entrance, he had already decided he would not let the ledger pass to whoever paid most. Inside, the long table in the workroom sagged beneath ink pots, folded folios, and the archivist's chain, worn counting tools. Alina worked under a single-angled lamp. She did not look up until he set the ledger down. "Where did you get that?" "Elena, from a courier behind the archive," he said. Elena's fingers stilled on a watermark. She smelled the page, as she always did when she wanted to date paper. They set a lamp closer and began to examine the cover and edges. Elena, who had copied parish lists 2 winters ago, leaned in and found a faint ink stamp that matched the bishopric rolls. "This is stitched from official lists," she said. "Baptisms, votive donors, tax rolls. Someone compiled nomination records who would collect names from the parishes." The archivist, he turned the page to the circled name, letters slanted. The ink had been pressed through. The burned sigil had been traced around a letter and rubbed with ash. He read aloud, slow and careful, so the sound of the name itself would not be careless. Garrick Moral. Elena's thumb paused over the binding. She met his eyes and did not look away. The ledger's origin shifted the problem from academic curiosity to political threat. The book contained official nominations, places where a name opened other doors. They found marginal notes in different hands, abbreviations the archivist recognized from council correspondences. Someone had pilfered registers and stitched them into a single instrument. The building hummed with the buzz of late night insects against the stone. Each scratch of quill felt louder. Their work paused when Brother Marcellus arrived with a council envoy at the gate. Marcellus' coat bore the council's seal. He did not enter the workroom. He waited in the foyer while the archivist covered the ledger with a cloth. The envoy's shoes clapped on stone. "We would inspect that ledger." "The envoy, it is evidence," the archivist replied. "No one sees it without record." Marcellus lifted his chin. He kept his hands at rest. "The council has a use for certain documents. We offer compensation and a quiet resolution if you yield it." His words were measured. The archivist felt suspicion curl into unease. Marcellus named sums and privileges and, beneath the polite list, hinted at consequences for refusal. Elena's jaw tightened. She shifted the lamp so the light hit Marcellus' hands and showed the slight tremor in his left ring finger. The archivist closed his eyes for one counted breath. He felt the ledger's weight through the cloth. Paper, ink, stitched thread, and the sense that names within were not inert. He refused the envoy. Marcellus' smile thinned. "You will reconsider," he said. "The council does not like surprises." When they left, the archivist locked the outer gate and carried the ledger to a candlelit alcove. Alone, he unrolled a clean sheet and set the ledger atop it. The air smelled of beeswax and iron filings from his tools. He reconstructed the marginal ritual slowly, using the notes and the sigil fragments scattered in the margins. He sketched each line in sepia ink. His hand hesitated at a loop of script. He pressed a fingertip to the loop and felt a prick of cold at the pad. His breath shortened. Doubt moved through him into fear. Doubt came first when he wondered whether copies of these lists had already changed hands. Fear arrived when a practiced scribal gesture revealed an incised binding meant to accept washes of ash. He tested the name with a faint tincture on a corner scrap. The ink ran and gathered into a pattern that matched the burned border. The ritual drew no voices. It used line and mark. An ingot nomination, when inscribed inside a sigil and sealed with scorched ash, altered the ledger's legal claim in ways neither civil code nor canon law could touch. He wrote a careful note, folded it, and tucked it in his pocket. He made a decision. He would not burn the ledger without understanding how the marks worked. Elena appeared in the stacks before dawn, shoes whispering on stone. She carried a small satchel and a face that had worn sleeplessness into hollows around the eyes. They stood between tall shelves where dust collected like dry pollen. Her voice hardly rose. "I have to tell you something, Archive," she said. He stopped and set down the folio he carried. "Elena," he said. Her hands found the ledger's edge and did not let go. "I copied names for a patron last year," she said. The admission hit like a cold draft between shelves. He had expected thefts and forgeries. He had not expected complicity from his own novice, who was the patron. He asked, "I never heard a name, only a sigil and a coin. I copied lists from the parish chest and bound them into folders. I delivered them through a street contact." Elena's voice was steady but small. Her confession forced the emotional temperature to flip. Betrayal spiked into anger. Then remorse softened the edges because Elena's hands trembled as she spoke. They spoke in quick lines. "Elena, why?" he asked. She let out one breath and then answered. "I thought they wanted only lineage verification. You gave them names." "Yes," she said. "I thought I helped with record keeping." He pressed his palm to his mouth and pulled in a slow counted breath. He felt both anger and an odd, sharp sorrow. The ledger's danger had migrated from unknown collectors to the very rooms where they catalogued sanctity. An hour later, the archivist and Elena crept into the sealed folio room with lanterns. They searched a folded pocket between the binding boards and found a slip of paper folded to the size of a thumb. A single name lay there in a hand he recognized with a jolt. It was his birth name. The discovery crashed into the room with soundless force. His fingers went cold. He read the name aloud once, haltingly. Adrian Voss. He had used that name rarely, only on the oldest inventories. Shock shifted suspicion into a personal fear that forced him to move. He had thought the ledger threatened unknown citizens and officials. Now it threatened him. Elena's eyes widened. "Adrian," she whispered. He felt the ledger's presence as if it were a living weight in the satchel. He closed his jaw and counted the possible reasons. Someone wanted leverage. Someone wanted to force him to act. Someone intended to remove him from a position of knowledge. He put the paper back into the folio, not burning it now, because the burnt sigil might react. He wrapped the ledger in linen and carried it into the great hall. At mid-morning, Brother Marcellus and the council envoy returned with 3 guards. The hall's stone echoed with boots and the scrape of armored sleeves. The archivist placed the ledger on the central table and did not move away. Marcellus spoke first. "Hand it over," he said. "No," the archivist replied. "You are making a mistake, Marcellus. You are the one who would make it," replied the archivist. The envoy stepped forward. "We offer one final exchange, price and pardon." Elena stood to the archivist's left, chin set. She held her hands tight around a folded folio. Marcellus smiled thinly and spread his hands. "I am not uninterested in the ledger's uses. I know you will choose prudence for the archive." The archivist opened the ledger. The pages fluttered like bird wings and stopped at the burned sigil. One of the guards reached for it. The archivist stepped between hand and page and slapped the binder shut. He drew a small iron knife from beneath his robe and slit a corner of the ledger's cover. He lifted a pinch of ink and ash and blew it toward the envoy. 3 guards lunged. A scuffle began. Elena struck outward and overturned a chair. The envoy shoved Marcellus backward into a pillar. Shouts filled the hall in short-clipped bursts. "Elena, hold the door." The archivist barked, "Adrian, here!" "Elena." The archivist felt a sudden blow against his shoulder. He staggered. Pain flared. He kept a hand on the ledger and pulled it toward the inner sanctum. Someone produced a small iron clamp and snapped it over the ledger's binding. The clamp sparked against the metal fittings and hissed as it touched the scorched margin. Brother Marcellus caught the archivist's wrist. You will not burn what you do not understand. Marcellus, I will not hand it to you either. The archivist answered and twisted free. The envoy counted off steps and gestured to the guards. They lunged again. Elena shoved a shelf in their path, scattering folios and sending a tumble of dust into the light. A guard slipped on loose parchment and hit his knee hard against stone. In the confusion, the archivist made a choice he had rehearsed only once in his head. He seized a burning brazier from the hearth. He must decide whether to burn the ledger, hide it, or wield it. He threw a sheet of oil, soaked vellum over the ledger and set the brazier on top. Flame took quickly. Ink smoked and curled. The ledger's binding blackened. The air filled with the bitter scent of scorched glue and old animal skin. Marcellus yelled. The envoy shouted. The guards scrambled to snatch at burning cloth. The archivist stepped back and watched flames climb. His throat tightened. For a heartbeat, fear rose and threatened to freeze him into inaction. Then resolve settled into his hands. He would not allow the ledger to leave as a tool to coerce or buy influence. He would not let the council own a book that turned names into claims. A guard lunged to slam the brazier aside. It toppled and sparks scattered like tiny live embers. A folio caught. The ledger took flame up the spine. The archivist moved in and, with coated gloves, grabbed the ledger and dove toward the inner sanctum. A guard pinned his coat. Elena pulled at the guard's sleeves. The archivist forced the inner door and slammed it closed on boots and curses. They heard pounding on the outer door and then silence. Inside, the ledger lay open on the table, its center pages already blackening. A single scrap had separated and curled into a half-burned crescent. On that scrap a name glowed faintly, as if under a heat that refused to cool. He read it again and felt a new, sharp absence. The name that glowed was neither his nor anyone they recognized. It was a name whose letters pulsed as if written over a sleeping vein. Silence filled the sanctum, except for the rasp of cooling metal and Elena's shallow breath. The archivist set the ledger down and ran his ink, stained fingers through his hair. Blood dotted his knuckles where a guard had struck him. He placed the scrap on a tile and touched it. Heat moved under his fingertip, and he jerked his hand back. They worked quickly and with method. He dampened a cloth and pressed it over the scrap. He closed the ledger and wrapped it in linen. The archivist sealed the inner sanctum with a heavy iron bar. He locked the chest and set the chained watch upon the table. He looked at Elena. "You will not speak of this to anyone outside these walls." He said. "I will not," she answered. She picked up the small folded folio she had carried earlier and slid it into the ledger's binding before he could stop her. She had kept a copy of names she once transcribed. She had hidden it against guilt and as a record. Elena's action changed the problem's direction. She had created both risk and a possible trace to the collectors. In the days that followed, the archivist catalogued marginalia and cross, referenced names with parish rolls and council lists. He found patterns. Certain families appeared repeatedly adjacent to the circled names. Certain priests' notations recurred under their clerical marks. The ledger was a map of influence, stitched through nomination. He questioned a street informant who saw him twice near a tavern where couriers clustered. The man would not talk at first, then whispered. They trade in names and favors. They bargain appointments. They mark names for removal or placement. Each new answer altered the angle of danger, doubt to fear to clarity. Those were his emotion shifts as he moved from suspicion to personal threat to an operational plan. One night a scrivener he consulted fainted when he traced a sigil's loop and realized the ink used incorporated an alloy reagent that reacted to saline breath. The archivist felt clarity arrive as a cold tool in his hands. He understood how a name written inside a sigil became convincing leverage. The mark activated when a designated act occurred, and the ledger's entries functioned as a ledger of claims the collectors could call upon. He and Elena began to compile a list of people named in the ledger and their likely vulnerabilities. They spoke of strategy in low, clipped sentences. "We can hide the most vulnerable names, Elena. We can warn families covertly," the archivist answered. "We can trace who issued the copies," she added. They found a clue in a watermarked seal, a mill mark used only in 3 parishes. that led to a woman who bound volumes for the council. When they reached her, she looked at the archivist with a flat, practiced stare and said, "I bind what I'm paid to bind. I do not ask for names." He showed her the ledger and watched for a slip, a sign of recognition. Her fingers trembled and she swallowed. "I used to work for a man named Gable. He paid with coin and a sealed letter. He left a sigil on the binding materials. I thought it was only bookkeeping work." This revelation made the network concrete. Binders, couriers, scribes, and patrons, all connected. The archivist felt the last emotion shift of the chapter, from clarity into a sharpened resolve that bordered on vengeance. Not a poetic transformation, but a decision he could act on. He set the ledger back in the inner sanctum and placed his chained watch near the lock. He would trace Gable's old routes and follow the chain from binder to patron to council contacts. Before dawn, he and Alina catalogued every name still legible and prioritized those whose livelihoods and families were threatened. He sealed his own inventory with wax and a small sigil he drew to mark the ledger as contained. It was symbolic, but also practical, a record of custody. Outside, someone knocked twice, then once a patterned knock that belonged to Brother Marcellus. He did not answer. Instead, he opened a window and slid the ledger's wrapped form into a narrow chest hidden beneath a false floorboard. He set a charred scrap on top so any intruder would see evidence of destruction. When he sat back, Elena touched his sleeve. "Adrian," she said, using his given name as if testing whether the person who carried it would answer. He looked at her, exhaustion in his face and an alertness that did not sleep. "We will trace them," he said. Alina nodded and left to prepare copies of the names they agreed to warn. He lit one last candle, placed it by the chest, and watched the flame. He had resolved the immediate struggle. The ledger would not go to the council at once, and the inner sanctum remained sealed. The ledger lay scorched on the inside and, for now, intact inside linen. On a charred scrap a single name glowed faintly. He touched that scrap and felt heat under his fingertip. The chapter ends with the ledger smoldering in a clear, concrete situation. The archivist securing the book in the inner sanctum and preparing to trace the collectors, his body bruised, his hands ink-stained, and his mind set on the next move. No grand statements, no promises, only action. He closed the hatch, wrapped the key in a slip of cloth, and placed it in his pocket. The knock at the outer gate continued, but he did not rise to answer it. Emotion roots, suspicion. Emotion shifts, suspicion, fear, clarity, resolve. The study door burst open. A man in the bishop's colors shoved a sealed warrant onto the ledger-strewn table and barked, "You tampered with the rolls." Suspicion tightened the archivist's fingers as he touched the waxed paper. He kept his voice low, and even while his hand found the quill at his ear. The emissary's eyes were hard. He stamped the warrant and said, "Names signed here are now instruments in the order's hands." Within 5 sentences, the accusation made the stakes plain. Written names were being used as legal bonds, and the ledger in the archivist's custody might already have been weaponized. Suspicion pushed the archivist to test the seal with gloved fingertips, and that tiny motion set the night's business in motion. He had not forgotten the courier from weeks earlier. He remembered shoving the courier against the wet wall and wrenching the ledger free when hands trembled around it. That memory, hands slick with rain, the courier's jaw working, the leather cover skidding along stone, sat under every motion now. The archivist straightened his spectacles and placed the courier's ledger between his palms as if it were both evidence and wound. He did not say the courier's name. He listed the facts aloud. The ledger arrived with the parish list. "I logged its transfer." His voice did not flinch, but his left thumb tapped the table twice, a nervous cadence. The emissary's mouth thinned. "We have a warrant, archivist." Bishop's orders, names entered their bind obligations. "You held that book alone at night." "Speak." The room smelled of wax and old ink. The archivist felt suspicion constrict, then shift into calculation. He looked at the page margins where ink had blurred into curious knots. He answered with measured precision, "I have custody notes. I keep ledgers in sequence. Show me the warrant and I will produce my log." His hand lifted the ledger's edge. A corner of fresh marginalia slid into view beneath the candle glow, the ink darker than the ledger's time. The emissary did not reach for the log. Instead he called a name down the corridor. "Write this, scribe." The guild scribe appeared, sleeves stained with iron oxide, face sharper than the candlelight. He carried a second ledger and a ledger's authority. A stamp with the guild crest. The scribe unrolled a cord and tapped it on the table. "This ledger passed through my office this morning," he said. His voice carried the blunt confidence of a man used to municipal denial. "These names were added after your custody. They are circled and sealed in our hand." The accusation shifted the room's temperature. The archivist's thumb drew a thin line across the table's scar. Brother Silas arrived then, stepping from the shadowed corridor with a small folded scrap pressed against his breast. He moved as a man who'd learned how to invisibly attend trouble. He did not speak first. He ever so lightly set the scrap near the brazier flame, and his eyes met the archivist's. "A hidden roster is circulating, Brother Silas." His words were simple. His urgency came in the way he kept glancing at the door. "Patrons are being named as obliged." The order uses names as jurisdiction. The archivist's suspicion hardened into alarm. He slid the ledger a fraction away from the scrap and unfolded the petition inside. The scrap contained a list of names, and beside one of them someone had traced a tiny sigil in lead. The sigil matched a mark the archivist had seen once before in a far corner of the ledger. He touched the sigil with two stained fingertips and felt, with a scholar's cold clarity, that the mark did not behave like ordinary ink. The lead sat at a slight angle to the paper's grain, as if pressed after the page settled. The tactile detail moved him from suspicion to dread. He nothing for a long beat, because speech might hand the room its next advantage. They walked to the table by the window. The archivist opened the ledger in full light. Names ran down the page in neat parish hands. Marginal annotations looped in a later, bolder script. Circles, thin rune-like marks, single letters that might have been initials. The archivist moved a candle closer and probed the circled entries with his finger. "These circles postdate my seal," he said. Pointing, "They were added after transfer." The guild scribe countered, "No. They were ratified here. We recorded them in the municipal roll." "You are mistaken, archivist." The scribe's tone sharpened. His eyes flicked to the emissary for backing. Tension rose into argument. "Guild scribe, the archivist, show me the municipal roll." The scribe slammed a heavy folio across the table and, in a compact exchange, produced a parish official to confirm. The parish official with ink, blackened thumbs who had written forms for 30 years. The officials argued in quick, clipped sentences. "These entries were ratified. The parish official, we have signatures. No signatures match the parchment's ink." The archivist answered, tapping the circled name. "This paper bears marginalia that did not exist the day the ledger arrived." "Who sealed these circles?" The scribe's jaw worked. Brother Silas leaned in and muttered, "We have witnesses who claim forced signings." The parish official's face shifted. For the first time he paused longer than politically prudent. That pause was an external event, a public obstruction unfurled. The parish official crossed his arms and refused access to records, citing ritual, confidentiality, and municipal process. The archivist moved his hand to a drawer and pulled an old registry slip. He compared pen strokes, paper fibers, and the ledger's watermark. He described the differences aloud. How a clerk's hand lifts on the second hump of how the ink pooled near the left margin when the scribe paused. He made small gestures with a magnifying lens. His actions were precise, not dramatic, yet each gesture deepened his resolve. Suspicion turned to method. The next morning, dawn found the archivist at the parish registry hall with iron bars between stacks. He pressed the registry clerk with questions and received the same obstinacy. The guild scribe stood at the rail and said, "Ratified." The parish official, "It was proper procedure." The archivist produced a rubbed letter where he had traced letters under a candle. "These entries have been altered. There is marginal ritual language describing notarization as oath, binding." The parish official's face went hard. "You accuse civic process of sorcery," he demanded. The archivist answered with a single fact. There is a marginal folio concealed within the ledger that describes a ritualized notarization. That admission changed their interaction from administrative dispute to a political obstruction that smelled of danger. He followed the paper trail. Brother Silas met him in a narrow corridor and pressed a warning into his palms, a small folded map and names circled in hurried graphite. Brother Silas spoke quickly, glancing toward the registry doors. They are circulating a roster that ties patrons to obligations. They will move to enforce those bonds quietly. Seek provenance before enforcement begins. The archivist read the map and traced the route with his thumbnail. Brother Silas's voice dropped, concrete and urgent. Check the folios at the vault, where ledger transfers are stored. The false shelf there has been tampered with twice this month. The archivist felt a shift then, suspicion sliding into fear, and he made a choice. He would go to the vault. At the underground archive vault, the archivist slid a false panel behind a row of folios. He had crawled behind shelving before to retrieve misfiled deeds. This time his knuckles scraped stone as he worked the hidden latch. He found a concealed folio bound in goat skin, its edges wax-dusted. When he opened it, the text described a notarial ritual. 4 signatures, a stamped sigil, and a recited formula that converted a written name into an obligation enforceable by local authorities. The language was procedural and precise. It mapped civic proof to spiritual compacts. The archivist read aloud, measuring each clause as if reading a statute. A name once entered with the ritual incurs duty and pledge, he said. He touched the margin and saw, faintly, a small note in his own hand. His name had been annotated in a hairline pencil stroke, almost erased, almost absent. He looked at the pencil mark and felt the room tilt between methodical study and personal peril. The pencil was faint but legible. A tiny caret beside his surname and a single glyph. A small, concrete detail, how he had once used that same glyph to mark research notes, made his stomach drop. The emotional shift moved from fear into a raw, personal realization. The ledger did not merely bind strangers. It now included him. He slid the folio inward and closed it with care. He did not call the emissary back. He did not seek the scribe. He walked instead to the antechamber where maps and charts lay in disorder. Daylight had thinned the vault's gloom when the masked agents arrived. They did not knock. They slipped in with practiced silence and immediate intent. Brother Silas shouted, "They are seizing the room!" The archivist grabbed the folio before anyone could act. Masks reflected candlelight like black coins. Hands moved toward the ledger. The archivist braced himself and shoved a table between the attackers and his hold. The room filled with motion. A chair toppled. Papers slid to the floor. One agent lunged at the folio. The archivist twisted and broke the reach. Brother Silas and the guild scribe began trading accusations in short, hard sentences. "Traitor. The scribe, you hide filth." Brother Silas answered, "You sold us out." The scribe snapped. The exchange whittled into a rapid argument of 3 to 6 lines that pushed the scene faster than any single narration could. They struggled by the vault's low arch. The archivist held the folio to his chest and felt its weight like a second pulse. The agents pressed. One produced a small iron clamp and a brazier wick. "Hand it over," a mask said. The archivist heard the guild scribe's voice close and rational. "Give the ledger to us. We will secure the names and verify their ratification." Brother Silas's voice split the difference, rough with worry. "If you hand it to them, they will bind people without oversight." The archivist swallowed and felt the 2 pulls at once. Conserve knowledge for posterity, or deny a power that could enslave by notation. Cornered beneath exposed rafters, he found a tindered page in a tray. The brazier's coals glowed a small, hungry orange. The decision pressed close in his throat like heat. He could surrender the folio and hand over his research. He could give it to the emissary and accept a public process, or he could burn the ledger and break the juridical line. He held the folio above the brazier and hesitated. His hand trembled and his quill tapped the table twice against his knee, his habitual tapping when thinking. That small, repeated sound signaled a change. Suspicion had moved into crisis, and crisis demanded a choice. The archivist's voice was low. "If I burn it, names will be erased, but we lose provenance and proof for those already bound," he he said. The guild scribe's response was quick and clipped. Better to keep order than chaos, Brother Silas. Better to save the living than preserve charters. The masked agents shifted, impatient. The archivist's thumb brushed the pencil mark with his name. He thought of the courier's ledger sliding from wet hands months before. The detail of that morning lodged like a splinter in his mind. He remembered the dampness of the stone, the courier's breath stuttering. The memory changed the ledger from artifact to hazard. He let the corner of the folio sink to the brazier. The edge caught, curled and blackened. Paper hissed. Smoke rolled in quick ropes. A single page caught flame and the ledger took its first small wound. Voices rose. Someone shouted, "No!" Someone else said, "Burn it clean." The archivist held the burning folio with slow care and slid it into a shallow brazier where coals could take it. The fire consumed entries in a deliberate arc. Hands reached and then withdrew. The guild scribe cursed. Brother Silas bent over a charred scrap and shaded it with his palm. Embers flared in the brittle paper and a single name glowed faintly at the ash's edge. The archivist recognized the name. For a long breath, no one spoke. The charred scrap on the table showed one surviving name, faintly luminous, as if the ink had stubbornly refused annihilation. The archivist picked it up with 2 fingers and read. It was a patron's name he had once copied for a probate. He felt the emotional shift again, from panic to stark resignation. He sealed the folio in his coat and said, "I will record what I learned and hide the method from those who would weaponize it." Brother Silas nodded and placed the charred scrap into his inner robe. The guild scribe spat. "You cannot hide law by burning pages." The emissary only watched. Later that night, after the embers cooled, they listened to the wooden rafters settling and the small, physical sounds of a place that had been disturbed. The archivist set the remaining folio into a hidden satchel and checked his signature ring to ensure nothing clung that would trace him. He moved with practical gestures. He snapped the satchel shut, slid it beneath his robe, and ran a finger along the seam of the false shelf to ensure the latch did not show tampering. He did not speak of destiny or fate. He catalogued a list of actions he would take: verify witness claims, reconstruct marginalia, and track the order's notarization network. He did not plan a speech. He planned small operational moves. Before they left, Brother Silas pressed his palm to the archivist's forearm. "You are named in the margin." His voice was plain. The archivist felt a cold, concrete shock run through his throat that he described by clearing it with 2 small coughs and a hand to the mouth. He did not ask why. Brother Silas replied, "Someone marked you to keep you close. They bind you by notation, not by chains." That sentence contained the twist. The ledger's danger was not only civic, it was personal. The archivist's breath shortened and the room contracted to the size of the ledger satchel. They left the vault with a single scrap between them and the knowledge that official procedure could be redirected into obligation. The archivist walked through the corridor with the foil of his coat damp from the brazier's heat. The guild scribe lingered in the doorway and said, "You will answer for this." The archivist met his gaze and replied in a plain voice, "We will see who enforces names and how." Brother Silas did not reply. He only pointed to the map and said, "Start at the parish where the first marginalia appeared." That instruction was the final concrete beat. A place to begin the next move. They sealed the vault door. The archivist placed the charred scrap in a hidden pouch inside his robe and closed his hand over it. He felt the ashes grit under his skin and with measured movement tucked the satchel into the false shelf behind the folios. Brother Silas turned the key and slid it into his pocket. The archivist drew a long breath, not a reflection but a practical resetting. He would verify the notarial ritual, trace the network of names, and, crucially, protect the people whose identities had been corrupted into instruments. He moved away from the vault with a plan to reference each surviving ledger entry, and to challenge municipal records where necessary. The chapter ends on a concrete action. The archivist nails a small brass plate over the false shelf seam, hammers 3 measured taps, and locks the plate with his ringed hand. Outside, someone knocks twice on the stone corridor door, rapid and deliberate. Brother Silas answers, steps pause, and then they both turn, hands still dusted with ash, as the knock repeats. The knock is the last sound. The ledger's problem does not vanish. It will follow them to the parish named on the charred scrap, and that next knock will set the next sequence in motion. He slipped between stone pillars and froze as the collectors began the roll call, names spoken aloud at midnight in the crypt. Suspicion drove him forward. Suspicion had kept him awake the last 3 nights and brought him here with a stolen lantern. The archivist counted the heads, then the syllables as the ledger opened. The first name spoken made a pale acolyte flinch and pressed both hands to her mouth. That concrete change, her fingers clamping over her lips, told him the ledger did not record the dead. It summoned the living. He had not expected openness. He had expected ledger pages and margins and the dry hush of archivists cataloguing dust. Instead, he found a circle of robed men and women reading from a book whose letters seemed ordinary until they were spoken. He kept his voice low. He kept his foot behind a chipped sarcophagus. He moved like a man who had once wrenched a ledger from a courier's hands and learned how quickly paper could change a life. The memory of that theft, hands trembling, wet stone under his palm, remained specific in his fingertips. The archivist's suspicion hardened into careful observation. He watched the acolyte. Her name had just been read, Marta. She recoiled in the dim and mouthed an involuntary syllable when the collectors said it. He noticed how one collector's fingers found a carved brass ring at his throat. He noticed the ledger's margins full of tiny sigils and the way the reader's tone tightened when a name matched a marginal sign. Those details pushed him. He had to act. He stepped from shadow and reached. "Stop," he said. His voice did not tremble. The rector nearest him dropped his head, and the chanting halted like a lever cut. "Stop." The bishop's emissary repeated behind the lectern, sharper, "Who is there?" The archivist kept his hand moving toward the ledger. He moved with an old, practiced motion, one taught by years of intercepting shipments and by hunger for names. A man in a deep black robe rose. "This is the order's right," the man said. "You are not invited." The archivist saw enforcers in the back, cloaks like exhaust smoke. One of them cracked a knuckle. A cold decision passed through the archivist's jaw. He lunged. The lung was not graceful. It was a short, animal movement. A hand on leather, a thumb catching the ledger's spine. The ledger shifted. Pages whispered. The bishop's emissary barked an order, and men moved in a spread, elbows and cloaks and a brass pendant flashing. A scuffle answered the lung. The archivist tasted dust and wax. He felt the ledger pull against his fingers, and then the ledger was wrested from him and clattered into the eisel. Acolyte Marta cried out. Her voice cut through the crypt like a struck bell. That cry changed the air into danger. The archivist's fear replaced suspicion then, immediate and precise. Fear of their willingness to protect the rolls with blood. He shoved a collector backward and reached for the ledger again. The bishop's emissary stepped into the lantern light and said, "You tampered with the rolls." The archivist's hand found the quill at his ear, a small, practiced motion that calmed his breath. They fought in a tight ring beneath the lectern's shadow. Hands sought the ledger, fists hit forearms, a ring fell and skittered on stone. Marta. Someone snapped, "Hold her back!" 2 enforcers closed on the acolyte. She crouched, palms visible, as if to show she had done nothing. The archivist shouted, "Marta, listen, give me the margin note." She answered with a torn slip held between 2 fingers. The paper was damp and the ink smeared. He saw the bracketed sigils. He saw a set of coordinates, parish numbers and dates hidden in her cramped script. They did not speak of mercy. They spoke of the ledger as if it were a map of dominion. The book binds names, the master of rolls him later, as if explaining a mechanism. A name written and called gives claim. We protect claimants and remove threats. The archivist heard the words as accusation and as confession. He thought of the courier in Chapter 1 and of the sealed warrant thrown onto his table in Chapter 2. Both events now slotted into a pattern. The order had used registration to bend parish power and to make obedience. These were not metaphors. They were accounts, columns, and a ledger that directed men. They split apart in the crypt. The archivist broke free with Marta's torn marginalia folded into his palm. He ran. He ran along corridors where air tasted of candle tallow and wet stone. He reached the hidden scriptorium behind the archive with boots leaving small, wet prints on the threshold. Marta followed, fingers pressed to her chest, breathing shallow. They slammed the door and set a candle. The scriptorium was narrow and low, ceilinged, stacked with rolls and maps that smelled of glue and time. Marta's hands shook as she smoothed the marginal note on the table. "Read it," he said. "Read it now, Marta." She blinked and watched him. Her voice was a thin reed. "They call us by ledger," she managed. "They call us and the ledger takes hold." She spoke small words, and then stopped. The archivist forced the note between his thumb and forefinger and traced the sigils with a fingertip stained black by old ink. "This decodes them," he said. "It ties a name to a parish entry and to an obligation. When they read, something in the name binds the person to a standing order." His fingers trembled as he pronounced the last sentence. "Marta, they called my name, and the priest at St. Ordone left his post for a fortnight." He obeyed with no question. Her eyes looked somewhere beyond the shuttered window. Father Thomas did not come back for 2 weeks. He returned pale, and he would not tell me where he went. Her hands clutched the torn margin. They use records to move people. The archivist's reaction folded from fear into a cold resolve. He placed the marginalia into his grimoire and made a decision. They would follow the pattern through parish registers. They worked until the guttering candle threw wavering shadows. He checked names against parish lists. He matched marginal sigils to inked columns. Each match grew a chart on the back of parchment: names, parishes, dates of call. The ledger's reach expanded across towns like printed columns. Then he saw it. A secret column behind the bishopric ledger, and in its topmost cell a name that had not belonged there in any public register. The bishop's own name sat in the margin's secret column. The name aloud, Bishop Arad. Marta looked up as if struck. The discovery turned the ledger from a local threat into an instrument of dominion that reached the church's highest seat. The archivist's thoughts sprinted ahead. If the bishop's name sat in that secret column, the order could claim obligations over him. The power dynamics reversed in his mind. The man who backed the order could be listed as bound. A decision followed discovery like thunder. They would not leave the ledger where it was. They would take proof and expose the mapping. They planned quickly. A copy of the secret column, a partial transcription, and a set of false entries to bury the most dangerous fragments. They argued in short, clipped bursts. "I'll copy the margins," the archivist. "You make a list of parishes that match." Marta's fingers rattled as she collected quills. "We need to move before dawn," she said. Their voices matched the tempo of a man used to cataloguing deadlines. Dawn arrived thin and grey. The archivist had not slept. He carried a bundle of sheets and the marginalia secreted in his robe. They left the scriptorium and passed along a cloister still slick with moss. As they reached the stony courtyard, men in dark cloaks poured from an arched passage. The order's enforcers moved like a second shadow line. 2 of them had already stationed by the garden wall. Marta's hand found his wrist and squeezed. "They found us," she whispered. The courtyard filled with men. The bishop's emissary stepped forward, face blank. "Return the marginalia, archivist," he said. "Hand it over and no further harm need befall her." His words were precise and controlled. The archivist held the bundle tighter. "No," he said. "I will not help you enslave people." The emissary tightened his jaw. "You endanger Marta." "Surrender the notes." A non-enforcer barked the name of an order, and 3 pairs of hands closed like iron across Marta. She screamed once and then stopped, as if the order's presence forced a legal silence. A bargaining took shape. The archivist offered a trade under a stone arch. "Take the copied pages." "Leave her." The emissary laughed. "You think trade will end this?" He owed the order. He stepped close. The master of rolls appeared behind him, robes immaculate, and said, "We ask for the marginalia. Without it, those copies are worthless." The archivist's heart hammered. He measured risk, counted the names he had transcribed. Marta's face, pale with fear, made the choice concrete. He could not let her hands be empty. He stepped forward with a single motion and hurled the bundle. Pages fluttered like wounded birds across the courtyard. The Master of Rolls moved to collect them. Instead, the archivist struck a brazier in the registry chamber with his heel, and the brazier tipped. Sparks asked. He grabbed the ledger itself from where an enforcer had dropped it during the scuffle and shoved it into the flaming brazier. Paper ignited with a small, fast roar. The binding smoked and dipped. The Master of Rolls lunged. Nights closed in. The ledger's pages began to curl and flame ate at ink and margin. For a breath, names flared and small letters smoked. The archivist felt a shock in the room, as if the names themselves pulled out of paper like threads. Marta screamed and then coughed, clutching her chest. A column of smoke rose, and the Master of Rolls stumbled back, eyes wild. The struggle that followed was raw and immediate. Hands tore at flapping pages. The Master of Rolls tried to wrench the ledger from the blaze. The bishop's emissary bellowed orders. Enforcers struck at the archivist. He matched them with whatever he could reach. A fallen candlestick, the edge of a table. He searched the burning pages with his fingers and plucked fragments that still bore marginal sigils. Heat seared his palm. He tossed a scrap into his cloak and felt the leather curl at the edge. He moved like a man saving the last vital instrument of knowledge. As the ledger burned, the room changed. Binding cords split and splinters popped. Some names smoldered and vanished entirely. Other names flared into a brief, visible light along the page before dying. The Master of Rolls retreated as if repelled by a visible recoil. Marta slumped to the floor and pressed her palms to her ears. Her shoulders shook in great, sudden gasps. "I feel different," she said. Her voice had space in it. "I do not know why." The archivist knelt and supported her shoulder. He noticed a new steadiness in her eyes, less vacant obedience, more registry-level recall. She could remember dates she had not known before, and yet she drew a breath as if emerging from a deep sleep. The room smelled of wet leather and singed ink. The Master of Rolls glared and then withdrew with his emissary. "We will return," he said. "This is not over." The enforcers left in a cluster, dragging ragged pages and muttering about burned claims. The bishop's emissary paused at the doorway and looked directly at the archivist. "You have made a dangerous choice," he said quietly. "You have not destroyed us as you hoped." The archivist wiped ash from his fingertips and answered, "I destroyed their ledger. You will have to find another way to claim names." The emissary's face did not change. He walked away. After the fight, they counted immediate consequences. Marta could stand. The archivist locked the registry door and moved toward the hearth. He took fragments of the ledger and hid them within false entries in parish rolls, sliding a name into a ledger under an ill-fitting scribe note. He wrote fake marginalia and then scraped the ink from the most dangerous scraps with pumice. He did not burn every page. He preserved a few fragments inside a false column that only he could find. Marta demanded to help. "We cannot simply hide everything," she said. "People need to know." Even, the archivist paused at her use of his given name. Something only a handful of people had done. He remembered the courier's struggle and the sealed warrant slammed onto his table. Those earlier confrontations informed him now. Exposure would provoke reprisals. He set a plan. "We bury the worst and expose the mechanism later," he said. "We keep a warning where scholars may find it, and we protect those still bound until they can be warned." His choice shaped what would happen next. He would not be the one to publicize every scrap. He would protect lives first. They made a secret record in a safe room behind stacked folios. The partial truth written in a cipher only he and Marta knew. He read aloud each line while Marta copied it, so human hands would witness the truth. "Bishop Arad's name appeared in the secret column," he said. St. Audoin's priest left his post after the call. "The ledger uses parish entries to command movement." Marta repeated the sentences and sealed them beneath leather. The act of speaking the truth to another human face rooted the danger. They bound themselves with an oath in ink, an act heavy with consequence. Outside, the abbey continued its daily litany. Bells struck noon with indifferent rhythm. The archivist kept a low profile in the scriptorium and changed his cataloging routine. He took pains to appear as if nothing had happened. He instructed Marta to resume copying rolls and to act as if the night had been a poor memory. She complied, but each time she dipped quill, her fingers trembled. Their emotional states shifted from suspicion to fear, then to resolve, and finally to guarded resignation. These shifts showed in small gestures. The archivist's jaw set tight when he recorded a name. Marta's hand hesitated over the ink when she came to a parish she had once loved. A twist came 3 days later. A courier arrived with a sealed letter for the Master of Rolls. The seal bore the bishop's crest. The archivist saw the courier and recognized the pattern. Attempts to reassert control through bureaucracy. He opened the letter's envelope by night and found a list of parish directives with names attached. An order to move certain priests to distant posts under immediate compliance. The signature at the bottom matched the bishop's hand. This document proved that the bishop had leveraged the ledger's mechanism for real political movement. He took the letter to Marta. "Look," he said, and pointed. Her face turned white as paper. "Bishop Erard ordered transfers 2 months ago. Father Thomas was listed." She read until the candle guttered. "He was bound," she said. "He left because he was called." The archivist clapped the letter shut. "This proves it's not merely the order acting in secret. The church itself has entries that match the ledger's claims." The discovery changed the scale. The order's reach used existing institutions to bend obedience. They discussed how to use that letter. Marta wanted to bring it to parish officials. The archivist counseled caution. "Go to the parish with this and you risk Monsignor's removal." He said, "Do that, and the order will wash its hands with obfuscation. They will claim clerical error. We need proof and a way to protect witnesses." They argued quickly. 5 short exchanges that ended with a decision to copy the letter and hide the original beneath a falsified burial record. The archivist did not trust open confrontation. Marta did. The disagreement forced a rapid exchange. 3 split, second lines, each cutting to the next. Their voices sharpened and then steadied. The Master of Rolls made one last attempt. He sent a low, ranking enforcer to the scriptorium who offered the archivist a bargain. A position that would secure both of them in exchange for the archival fragments. The man spoke smoothly. "Join us, help us keep order. You will be safe." The archivist answered with a single sentence, "I serve records, not power." The enforcer laughed dryly and left. The exchange proved the Master of Rolls' willingness to co-opt the archive's authority. In the final act, the archivist faced the ledger's remaining danger and the human cost. He had burned most of the book. He had hidden the rest. He had preserved evidence that implicated the bishop and the Master of Rolls. Marta's relief after the ledger's flames had a cost. She could not return to clerical tasks without suspicion. Her hands sometimes trembled over baptisms. The archivist made a choice for her and for the records both. He would enter a slow, deliberate sabotage of the order's administrative mechanism. He produced false columns and redistributed names into decoy ledgers across several parishes. He trained Marta to place a small marginal sign that would misdirect any future reader. She learned the pattern and her hands steadied. They planted one genuine fragment in a place where a trusted local scholar would likely find it after months. Enough to seed the truth without exposing the living immediately. That plan contained risk, but it offered protection. A surprising twist occurred as the sun slid toward evening. Bishop Erard himself came to the archive. Not his emissary, not the Master of Rolls. He walked into the registry with hands empty and eyes that had not been stern but tired. He called the archivist by name. "Even," he said, surprising both of them. The archivist felt a sharp, personal recognition at the bishop's use of his given name. Erard's presence did not end the danger, it reframed it. Erard did not accuse. "What did you do?" His tone was direct and stripped of ritual. Marta stepped forward and said, "Bishop Erard, your name appears in a secret column." The bishop's face changed color in a small, human way, flushed then drained. "This is how they claimed me," he whispered. He moved closer to the hearth and touched a scorched scrap between their fingers. "I did not know my name had been used to bind men. If it is true, then I have been a pawn." His voice revealed a layer of regret. This was the twist that altered the story. the bishop's admission that his name had been lodged into the ledger not as a willing act, but as a forced inclusion. He had been enlisted by the order and then used. He now offered a pragmatic resolution. "I will order an open registry for parish transfers," he said. "I will break any secret columns in my own records. But I cannot do this alone. You must show me proof." The archivist and martyr exchanged a look. The bishop's involvement shifted the axis of power. It revealed that the order had cultivated allies by stealth and that exposure could fracture that alliance. They set terms. The archivist handed the bishop the sealed letter and a few salvaged fragments. Martyr read aloud, ensuring witnesses. The bishop tapped a finger on the table. Then he sealed the registry with a public decree signed and given to 3 trusted clerics. His signature carried weight. For a moment, the ledger's method of binding names seemed vulnerable to ordinary clerical oversight. Yet the Master of Rolls did not disappear. He left the registry with a cold smile, and in his absence the archivist felt a new wariness settle into his bones. The order would regroup. It would find other ledgers and other columns. The archivist had won a battle. He had not eliminated the mechanism entirely. His emotion shifted again. From resolve to wary stewardship. He understood that destroying paper changed immediate outcomes, but that habits of power could replicate the ledger's intent. By midday the registry had settled into an uneasy routine. The archivist catalogued receipts, moved bundles, and watched martyr copy rolls with precise care. They both spoke only when necessary. Their actions carried the weight of choices made. The burning of a ledger, the hiding of fragments, a bishop's public decree, and the binding oath the archivist had written in the safe room. Each choice left a mark with consequences, and with small protections soon in, they closed the chapter with concrete acts. The archivist buried the most dangerous scraps beneath false entries. He placed the partial truth where a curious scholar might find it in a decade. Martyr refiled parish records, her hand steady. Bishop Erard left with a sealed request to reform registry practice. The Master of Rolls retreated to conspiracy. The archivist recorded the events in a private grimoire, and then at the final light, he took a single scrap and sealed it beneath leather. He bound the grimoire's clasp and set his thin brass spectacles on top. He tapped the quill against his ink-stained fingertips. He whispered not to the reader, but to Martyr as she stood in the doorway, "We protect what names still matter." She nodded and closed the door behind her. The final concrete gesture closed the ledger's immediate threat. The archivist raised the small iron key he kept on a chain and slid it into the safe. He turned it once, then twice, and heard the bolt settle. He placed the key into his jacket and blew out the candle. The room went dark, and the smell of ash and ink lingered as the only evidence of what they had done. Outside, a bell struck the hour. Inside, the archivist breathed and then moved to the hearth to warm his fingers, counting names in his head like coins. He had preserved some and destroyed others. He had forced a bishop to acknowledge misuse, and had bound himself with an oath to watch the mechanism. The ledger's ashes lay in a brazier and fragments slept in false columns. The registry would carry forward, altered but still fragile. He set his spectacles on his face, and began the slow work of indexing the names that remained, each a small promise to the living. The archivist closed the safe with a hand that still smelled faintly of smoke, and he left the grimoire open on the table to the page, where Martyr's handwriting had copied the marginal note. He slid the torn marginalia beneath a folded sheet so that only the edge showed. He locked the door from the outside and walked down the cloister, feeling the stone under his boots. He paused and listened for footsteps. When none came, he picked up the pace, carrying the weight of the day like an object to be catalogued. The ledger's reckoning had ended with an act. A ledger half consumed, names altered, a bishop forced to act, and an oath bound in ink. He walked away with the last scrap tucked beneath his scarf and the iron key warm in his palm.